congratulatory comments. They are not at all deserved, but they are sincerely appreciated. Grand Master, I am very thankful for the opportunity to return to your Grand Lodge, the great state of Washington again this year.
Get a little closer to the mic. Close enough.
And I appreciate the hospitality exhibited by you, Grand Master. To our right worshipful Grand Lodge officers, my sincerest best wishes as you progress up your advancing life. But most especially to you, my brethren, who have assumed the positions of leadership and responsibility in your lodges, which in fact are masonry. It is not the Grand Lodge that will create new members of our fraternity. It is not the Grand Lodge that will convey to the public the value of the principles which we espouse. It is not the Grand Lodge which will inspire young people to adopt the lifestyle we would exhibit for them. But it is you and your lodge that will make masonry a success. It is you and your life who will exemplify the principles which justify our existence. It is you and your lodge who are the future of our fraternity. And it is the Masons of tomorrow to whom we are now pledged to learn, to grow, and to become the leaders which they deserve. Now, how many among you are fans of science fiction? And how many among you are fans of H.G. Wells? And if you didn't raise your hand both times, then you're not really a science fiction fan. H.G. Wells, of course, we probably most often associate with the time machine, War of Worlds. Wells lived from 1866 to 1946. And in 1933, one of his great seminal works was The Shape of Things to Come. How many of you are familiar with that work? A few. Let me give you, for those who are not, this brief synopsis or summary of The Shape of Things to Come. Now, Wells wrote this in 1933, 6 years ahead of the beginning of the great European conflict, which would engulf the entire planet. And in it he speaks of a world war, of course drawing upon what he had lived through as an adult in World War I. A world war which goes on for months and years and decades, and which devastates the planet, reducing mankind to a feudal society governed by petty warlords, totally bereft of the blessings of civilization, totally without hope for the future, the bleakest of prospects that one could consider. Wells, of course, then turns the story to one of hope and a probable future of greatness by positing that a group of scientists, technicians, and engineers who have somehow escaped the great cataclysm begin to rebuild society, and by the use of their learning, their skill, their art, they overcome the tragedy which has befallen mankind, and over the next decades and centuries, build an utopian society. And of course, from that standpoint, it's like any great adventure novel. It's very entertaining, and of course, Wells, a great facile writer, very, very enjoyable writer. The backstory on it is that on the peak of humanity's greatest achievement, which for Wells, in that expression, was to escape the planet Earth and to begin to explore the cosmos, meets with resistance from these very people, some of these very people who have benefited from all that science and technology and learning and engineering and mathematics and chemistry and botany have given to them. And the denouement of the story is that one can never stop progress. No matter how far society had come in the shape of things to come, yet there was still a future to be achieved. Yet there was still greatness to be sought for. Yet there were still challenges to be addressed. Yet there was still a future requiring the contribution of all of mankind. Interesting story, you say. Thank you for the synopsis. What in the name of God does that have to do with this Warden's Conference? I will expand a little bit on what Wells's motivation probably was in the writing of the story, and you need to recall the background of the individual and the era in which it was written. Wells, as I say, born 1866. That means, as a very young man, he was growing up at the, I guess that would have been the end of the Victorian era, or the Edwardian age coming on, I suspect. And as a young man, he was seeing the great advances, for instance, in medicine, science and technology. The telegraph and the steam engine were pretty well established by that time, but the transcontinental telegraph line, you see, came into existence in the line. And railroads became a standard mode of transportation. And he saw the development of x-rays and antibiotics. And he saw what botany and science and mathematics and all of these things can do. So he was growing up, as we are today, in a great era of technological innovation, growth, and expansion, of seeing a world reborn. And then, of course, in the lifetime of his generation, experienced the Great War. Because remember, that's what it was called, the Great War. Nobody said we're in the middle of World War I, because God forbid there should ever be another one. God chose to provide that there would be. But in the early 1900s, it was the Great War. And for a European, for a Briton, like Wells, nothing could have been more desolate, nothing could have been more devastating, nothing could have suppressed the belief in the hope for the future any more than germ warfare, chemical warfare, trench warfare, month after month, year after year. The pride of manhood of Europe wasted. Devastation throughout the continent. And so in Wells's mind, he is seeing both the great promise of what mankind can do, and yet the great tragedy which it can cause to come upon itself. Fortunately, as Masons, we do not face the life-threatening tragedies of World War as part of what we do as Masons. Conversely, we do not enjoy the prerogative as Masons in the practice of our art to develop a cure for AIDS, or to be the ones who provide nuclear fusion as a safe power source for the world in generations to come. But it is no less important that what we can do, we must do. What we can relieve in the burden of mankind, we are obligated to do. What we can share with others, we must share with others. So greatness and accomplishment and success will not necessarily be measured in the standards of the planet, but in the hearts of the men who inhabit it, and the women who direct the course of the future, and the children who look to the adult guidance and sponsorship for a roadmap to what their lives should be. Greatness in Masonry will reflect through the ages. What we can do perhaps will not avoid a great war, but will it make it less likely? Will it provide relief to those in need? Will it provide guidance and inspiration to those who would serve? Your job, therefore, is one of no less import than the fictional scientists and engineers who brought about the renovation of the planet in Wells's story. What do you look to? Wells was writing from the life experiences that he had, from the history which he lived, from the society of which he was a part. And so must Masonry. And the first lesson you must not just acknowledge, but embrace, is the most important thing that you will do is to change the face of this fraternity. And that, of course, is the great heresy. We never change Masonry. It is the lodestar constant in the heavens of society. How many of you have heard that sentiment? If not in those words, at least in that expression. In fact, nothing could be further from the truth, and the proof of it is your presence here tonight. The proof of it is the confidence which your lodge has placed in you to become its master. If all we desire was a continuation of everything that has gone before, we would not elect a new master every year. We would find the best man, and he would serve until he was no longer capable. If all we desired to do was to maintain that which had been given to us in the past, we would consist of nothing but the recitation of empty words, a withdrawal from society, an inculcation of private virtues. And I suggest to you that nothing could be further from the truth of what Masonry is, and nothing could be a greater betrayal of the pledges which we have made, not only to improve our own lives, but to share the principles of this fraternity with everyone who will hear the message. If you think this is not true, let me lay some facts before you to consider. Our earliest brethren, at the beginning of the 18th century, perhaps the end of the 17th century. I was only an entered apprentice at the time, so I caught it on that. Tell us in the written records which exist that Masonry consists of 2 degrees, that of entered apprentice and fellowcraft. How many of you knew that? Look at the earliest records. Ask a Mason at the beginning of the era of the speculative craft, and he will tell you Masonry consists of 2 degrees. The creation of the master's degree was an innovation in the body of Masonry. Check a little later and you'll find that Masonry consists of exactly 3 degrees: entered apprentice, fellowcraft, master mason, which includes the Royal Arch degree. And then that went away. Ask a brother at that time if he could conceive of the entity of which we are a part today, with 29 Scottish Rite degrees, the degrees of the chapter, council, and commandery, the Royal Order of Scotland, the Red Cross of Constantine, and how long do you want me to keep going? They would have thought you mad. They would have thought you delusional in suggesting that such is possible. Prior to 1717, we acknowledged what I began my comments here with. It was only in 1717 it was felt necessary to have a Grand Lodge. Prior to that time, lodges existed of their own accord. You know why the Grand Lodge was formed? To promote communication and to sponsor the quarterly feast. Social and communication. It was not to make Masons. It was not to promote the general welfare of society. It was assumed then, as I suggest to you, that it must be acknowledged today, that it is your duty in your lodge to promote the general welfare of society. You cannot, you must not betray to others the responsibility which belongs at home, in your heart, in your east, around your altar. That is your responsibility, not this Grand Lodge's. That is your opportunity, not mine. My time is past. Yours is yet before you. Yours is the great adventure which should inspire you to do all of which you are capable, to share that which we have with others. Say interesting historical anecdotes, but they're rather outdated. All right, let's talk about this. How many black balls required in your Grand Lodge to reject a petitioner?
1.
Is that the way everywhere?
No.
No, of course not. Used to be. Many Grand Lodges now, like Texas, 3 black balls required. That change occurred in my lifetime. Granted, I'm substantially older than you, but not that much older. Solicitation. What do we know about solicitation? You can never ask anyone to join Masonry. They must come of their own free will of accord. But check the laws of the Grand Lodges, and you will find that solicitation rules have been modified, where it is permissible to posit a neutrally worded invitation to consider joining to a man that you feel qualified to be a member of the fraternity. Not everywhere, but in some cases. Proficiency requirements. What do you have to do to advance from one degree to another? This changes from year to year and from Grand Lodge to Grand Lodge. What's the minimum age to be a Mason in the Grand Lodge of Washington?
18.
Always been that way?
No.
Of course not. These changes occurred in our lifetimes. What's going to happen next year? What's going to happen next decade? It's going to happen when our sons become the new Masons of this Grand Lodge, of our lodges. Well, it's a little bit hard to predict, the same way that it's hard to predict where Masonry will be as an institution. I'll only go back to 1900 because the numbers get a little sketchy prior to that time. Consider the state of Masonic membership in 1900, just over a century ago. What do we know about Masonic membership following 1900? Anybody? No one knows a damn thing about what happened after 1900. Okay. Look at the membership statistics. Masonry experienced a steady growth, steady, measurable growth for 29 years. What happened in 1929? What happened to Masonic membership in 1929? Wrong. It began a slow decline. It was not a mirror image of the stock market crash. The stock market went from here to there overnight. Masonry took 8 years to decline in membership. When did the great renewal in Masonic membership begin? Anyone? Give me a year. Give me a year.
46. 50.
Wrong. 1937, the height of the Depression. Check the numbers. I have 1937 is when membership began to increase. World War II had no effect on the timeline. The numbers continued. When did membership peak? Anyone?
64.
64, what'd you say?
66.
You missed it. 61. Why did Masonic membership begin to decline? Who says the Vietnam War? Okay, good. You're all right because the Vietnam War didn't have a damn thing to do with it. No. Here's the importance. You see, that's what gets the blame. Well, you know, we went into Vietnam and it tore the country apart. No. The first American troops didn't even, the first combat troops, excuse me, did not begin landing until this week in 1963. 35,000 troops in first time. Now, there were advisors prior to that time. Yes, they were living and dying, and they were sacrificing for freedom. The massive American intervention did not occur until a full 2 years after Masonic membership began to decline. Society and where it goes and what it does will not determine the course of this fraternity. We will succeed or fail based upon our own efforts. We will grow because we are worthy, or we will fail because we have not put forth the effort necessary to share with the community at large the importance of what we have to say, what we have to teach, and the gifts which we would share with others. It is not within our power to predict with certainty what the future shall be. It is, however, within our power to commit tonight and each day hereafter as members of our lodge, as leaders, the leaders that you will be. What is possible? What is the shape of things to come? Just as Wells's fictional world was saved by men of learning and education, so I suggest to you the future of this fraternity will be saved by men like you with education, learning, training, and devotion, and the willingness to sacrifice, which will permit us to expand our message to the world at large, to recommit ourselves to what we have espoused in our obligations, to share with our families the meaning of brotherly love, relief, and truth. So I cannot here tonight stand before you and lay a course which I would suggest you follow in every detail. It is beyond my capacity to do so. I suggest to you, even with great leaders such as those now in your Grand East and those who will shortly hereafter follow, it is still not within the capacity of any one man or woman. However, collectively, what we may do as this united fraternity may exceed the expectations, the hopes of us individually. what we may do collectively can so shape the world in the future that men may look back in future generations of our craft and say that at this time, in this place, they began a transformation which not only saved and renewed our fraternity, but shared with the world the worth and the value of what Masonry is and can be and what its leaders should be. And you say to me, this is such an enormous task that you propose. How can you possibly suggest it as a realistic way of life? And I will close with the thought and the inspiration for what took me into public service. I heard as a young man one of the most charismatic figures in the history of our country, President John F. Kennedy. It was his inspiration which led me to go into public service. And in announcing what would become the Apollo space program, President Kennedy said, "We choose to go to the moon and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. You and I choose to be members of this fraternity, not because it is an easy way of life, but because it is a demanding one. You and I choose to accept positions of leadership and responsibility, not that we may achieve great honor, but that we may do great service. Therefore I entreat you, my brethren, use tonight as the stepping stone upon which you will build the future of your lodge, of everyone whom it shall touch in the future, and those who may look back upon this as indeed the shape of things to come for the greatness of our fraternity, our state, our nation, and the world. God bless you, and let us now set to work. Thank you.